She wasn't looking for love again. But the night she looked into my eyes and whispered, "I don't want a second chance at love, I want you," I realized neither of us could keep pretending. I had only been living in that small apartment building for a week when I first noticed her. My balcony faced hers, just a stretch of quiet air between us, and most evenings, around dusk, she would appear with a watering can in hand. There was something deliberate in her movements, as if each task, checking the soil, trimming a leaf, pouring water, was not just care for her plants, but a ritual she depended on to keep herself steady. She wasn't the kind of woman you glance at and forget. No, she had a presence, subtle, graceful, yet unmistakable. She looked to be in her early 40s, with a composure that spoke of years lived and lessons carried. Her dark hair, tied back loosely, caught the last streaks of sunlight. And though she often kept her gaze lowered, when she did glance up, even briefly, her eyes held something I couldn't quite name. They were warm, but heavy, like a smile half-remembered. The first time we acknowledged each other was nothing more than a polite nod. I had stepped out with a book and a mug of tea, and she was tending to a pot of jasmine. She lifted her eyes, caught me looking, and offered the smallest smile before returning to her work. Yet, that tiny gesture lingered in me far longer than it should have. Even from across the gap, I could sense she carried a kind of quiet sadness, the sort you don't announce but that still moves with you, like a shadow stitched to your steps. I didn't know her story, and I didn't dare assume, but there was no mistaking it. She wasn't lonely in the loud, desperate way some people are. Her solitude was gentler, more dignified, as though she had made peace with it, or at least was trying to. Most evenings followed the same rhythm. Around the time the sky dimmed to indigo and the first stars showed themselves, she would step outside with her watering can, and I would find myself drifting to my balcony too, sometimes with a book, other times with nothing at all. I told myself it was coincidence, but deep down, I knew I was drawn by her presence. There was one night when the air carried the unmistakable scent of jasmine from her plants, soft and sweet, drifting across the space between us. I remember leaning against the railing, closing my eyes for just a second, and letting that fragrance settle into me. When I opened them again, I found her looking at me. Not directly, more as if she had been studying me quietly before I noticed. And when our eyes met, she didn't look away immediately. Instead, she held my gaze, offering the faintest, almost apologetic smile, before retreating back inside. It was such a small thing, two neighbors exchanging glances in the fading light, but it left my chest tight, restless, as though something unspoken had passed between us. Something that didn't need words yet felt heavier than silence. And from that night onward, I realized, I was waiting for dusk, waiting for her, without even admitting it to myself. The rain came suddenly that evening. One moment the street outside was calm, and the next, heavy drops were spilling from the sky, drumming against rooftops, filling the air with that unmistakable earthy fragrance of wet soil. I stood by my window for a while, watching the blur of headlights through the downpour, before stepping out onto the balcony for some air. That's when I saw her. She was returning from the corner store, arms full with two paper bags, her umbrella struggling uselessly against the wind. The sight stirred something in me, an urge, almost instinctive, to cross the distance. Without thinking, I grabbed my own umbrella and hurried down the stairs. By the time I reached her, she was fumbling with the bags, one slipping dangerously against her hip. Her hair was already damp, strands clinging to her cheek. When she glanced up at me, a little startled, I raised the umbrella over us both. "Here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let me help." For a second, she hesitated. There was pride in her posture, the kind that comes from learning to carry your burdens alone. But then she let out a soft sigh and handed me one of the bags. Her voice, when she finally spoke, surprised me. It wasn't as guarded as I expected. "Thank you. I thought the rain would hold off." We walked together slowly, the umbrella barely wide enough for both of us. Our shoulders brushed now and then, and each time, I felt the tiniest jolt of awareness. She smelled faintly of rain and jasmine, a mix so gentle yet so present I found myself breathing it in without meaning to. As we reached the building entrance, she gave a small laugh, a real one, light and unforced. "I must look ridiculous," she said, glancing down at her soaked dress. "Not ridiculous," I replied before I could stop myself. "Just, human." She tilted her head then, looking at me with eyes that seemed to weigh more than the words we had spoken. A pause stretched between us, filled with nothing but the rhythm of rain and the faint thud of my heart. When we finally reached her door, she unlocked it with practiced ease. I handed her the bag and stepped back, expecting the moment to end there. But she lingered, one hand resting on the doorframe. "You're kind," she said softly, almost as if it were a confession. Then, after a beat, "It's been a while since someone noticed." Her words settled in me, heavy yet delicate. She wasn't talking about groceries or umbrellas. She was talking about her. Before I could respond, she gave a small, almost shy smile and slipped inside, closing the door with quiet finality. I stood there for a while, listening to the rain, feeling the warmth of her voice echo in me. And for the first time, I realized, this wasn't just neighborly kindness pulling me toward her. Something deeper was beginning to stir, something I hadn't expected, yet couldn't resist. It was a few days after the rain when she invited me in for the first time. The offer came almost casually. She had caught me on the stairs, carrying a bag of books, and asked if I liked tea. I said yes, of course, though the truth was I would have said yes to anything just to see the world behind her door. Her apartment was warm, lived in. Not cluttered, but full of traces of a life already lived. Framed photographs on the shelves, soft throws draped over the couch, books stacked with no real order but clearly loved. There was a calmness to the space, but also an undercurrent of something heavier, like the quiet after a song ends, when the silence feels louder than the music that came before it. She moved easily around the kitchen, pulling down cups and setting water to boil. I found myself watching her with a kind of fascination, not because of anything extraordinary she was doing, but because of the gentleness in her movements. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't performing, she was simply being. And yet, even that felt rare, precious. When she handed me a cup of steaming tea, our fingers brushed. A small thing, almost nothing, but I felt it like a spark, a reminder of how little it takes for one person to leave a mark on another. We sat across from each other at the small dining table. The rain from earlier in the week had passed, leaving the night outside still and clear, the faint hum of the city softened by distance. At first, our conversation was light, books, music, the neighborhood. She asked what had brought me here, and I told her about wanting a quieter place to write, to think. She listened intently, nodding, her eyes not drifting the way people's often do. But as the tea cooled, our words deepened. She spoke of the garden she tended, how it had started as a distraction but had grown into something she couldn't imagine being without. Then, slowly, her voice lowered, as if stepping into unfamiliar territory. She mentioned her husband, not with bitterness, not even with overt sadness, but with the reverence of someone acknowledging a wound that never fully closed. "I thought I had put that part of me away," she said softly, staring into her cup. "The part that dreamed, that wanted more. But sometimes it still stirs, when I least expect it." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't fill the silence with empty comfort. Instead, I let the quiet stretch, meeting her eyes with what I hoped was understanding. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and for the briefest second, her hand slid across the table, resting near mine. She didn't quite take it, but the closeness was deliberate. My heart beat louder than it should have for something so small. We talked until the tea was gone, until the hour grew late and her voice softened with fatigue. And when I finally rose to leave, she walked me to the door, her presence close, her expression unreadable. "Good night," she whispered, her voice gentle, yet carrying a weight I couldn't name. And as I stepped back into the hallway, I realized, her world wasn't closed to me anymore. She had opened a door, not just to her home, but to herself. It was close to midnight when I heard a gentle knock on my door. At first, I thought I had imagined it, the building was usually so quiet at night. But when I opened it, there she stood, her hair loose, a cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked almost hesitant, as if she had debated turning back before I answered. "Could you," she began, her voice soft, "come see something with me?" I nodded without a second thought. She led me upstairs to the roof, where her small garden stretched in neat rows of pots and planters. Even in the dim glow of a few lanterns she had strung along the railing, it felt like another world, alive, fragrant, overflowing with the quiet persistence of green. The air carried the faint sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, mingling with the cooler breath of midnight. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I usually come here when the house feels too heavy." We sat side by side on the wooden steps that overlooked her plants. Our shoulders brushed lightly, not enough to startle, but enough to make me aware of the exact point of contact. She sighed, resting her watering can down. "It's strange," she murmured, looking out at the skyline. "I used to hate the silence. Now, sometimes, I crave it." Her words carried weight, though her tone was calm. I didn't interrupt, only let the silence between us stretch and breathe. There was a tenderness to the quiet here, unlike the emptiness that lingered in hallways or stairwells. After a while, I spoke. "You've made this space feel alive." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I needed to. Otherwise, it was too easy to forget I still could." Her confession hung in the air, delicate but powerful. She wasn't just talking about plants. She was talking about herself, her need to create life and beauty despite loss, to remind herself that she was still capable of nurturing something. A breeze drifted across the roof, carrying her sleeve against my arm. The touch was accidental, but it stayed with me, sending a warmth through me that no midnight air could cool. She tilted her head back, gazing at the stars barely visible through city haze. "I used to watch them with him," she said softly, not naming who, because she didn't need to. "For a long time, I thought I'd never look at them again without breaking." Her voice trembled, just barely. And in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to close the small space between us, to let her lean against me, to show her she wasn't carrying her grief alone anymore. But instead, I stayed still, letting her decide if closeness was what she wanted. When she finally exhaled, it came as a long, steady breath. Her shoulder pressed a little more firmly against mine, not in need, not in desperation, but in trust. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. The lanterns flickered softly, the scent of jasmine deepened, and the night wrapped itself around us like a quiet promise. And for the first time, I realized, silence with her wasn't empty. It was full, of possibility, of meaning, of something neither of us had dared to name yet. The days that followed carried a quiet shift between us. It was subtle, barely noticeable if someone else had been watching, but I felt it in every glance, every pause. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We had crossed some unseen threshold. And yet, with that closeness came a weight, a hesitation that neither of us could ignore. One evening, she asked me to stay a little longer after helping her rearrange some heavy pots in her garden. The lanterns were glowing, the air warm with the faint scent of lavender she had planted along the edges. We sat together at the table just outside her door, our hands resting on the wood, close but not touching. She was unusually quiet. Her eyes, usually steady, kept wandering, toward me, then away again. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever think about what people might say?" Her voice was low, hesitant, as if she was testing the question on her tongue before committing to it. I knew what she meant. She didn't have to spell it out. She was older, a widow, a woman who had already lived through the promises and heartbreak of love. And well, I was young enough that people would wonder, would talk. I swallowed before answering. "Sometimes. But it doesn't matter to me." She gave a soft, sad smile. "It matters to me." Not because of them, but because, she paused, her fingers tracing an invisible line on the table. Because I promised myself I wouldn't betray what I had before. That I wouldn't let anyone take his place. Her honesty hit me like a stone dropped in still water, sudden, rippling, impossible to ignore. I could see the glimmer in her eyes as she spoke, the fragile balance between love that had ended and love she was afraid to begin. I don't want to replace him, I said quietly, searching for words that wouldn't sound hollow. I just want to know you. As you are, now. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to answer, but no sound came. Instead, she looked down at her hands. They trembled, just a little, but enough that I noticed. Without thinking too much, I reached across the space between us, laying my hand gently over hers. The contact was feather-light at first, in case she pulled away. She didn't. She stayed still, her breath catching in a way I could hear in the night silence. Her fingers didn't grip mine, but they didn't withdraw either. The tremor eased, and after a moment, she whispered, "You make it sound so simple." "It doesn't have to be complicated," I murmured. But I knew it wasn't simple. Not for her. Not for us. The weight of her past, the shadow of what people might think, the uncertainty of where this path could lead, it all hung in the air between us. Yet beneath it, beneath the fear and hesitation, there was something else. A pull. A desire neither of us could deny, though we hadn't yet named it. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I could still feel the ghost of her hand beneath mine, the warmth, the fragility, the quiet plea hidden in her silence. And it left me restless, caught between patience and longing, wondering how much longer we could hover in this delicate in-between before something, one way or another, would break. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city outside seemed to fold into itself. The hum of traffic was distant, softened by the cool night air drifting through the open windows. She had asked me to come by, her window latch had broken, and though it was a small thing, she said she couldn't quite manage it on her own. I brought my toolkit and fixed it easily, the metal clicking back into place with a satisfying sound. "There," I said, brushing my hands. "Good as new." She stood beside me, her arms folded loosely across her chest, watching. But she didn't move when I finished. She stayed there, close enough that I could feel her presence like a warmth radiating just beyond reach. "Thank you," she murmured, though her voice carried more weight than the task deserved. I turned to face her. In the dim glow of the lamp, her features were soft, almost fragile, though I knew she was anything but. She had endured loss, carried silence, built a life out of pieces. Yet tonight, something in her seemed to be unraveling. She stepped closer, slowly, as though testing each movement. Her hand hovered for a moment before resting lightly against my chest. I froze, not out of discomfort, but out of awe at the gentleness of the touch. Her fingers didn't press, didn't cling, just lay there, trembling faintly, as if seeking the reassurance of something steady beneath them. Her eyes lifted to mine. There was no guardedness now, no polite distance. Only raw honesty. "I've told myself 100 times that I'm not ready," she whispered. "That I shouldn't feel this. That wanting someone again meant letting go of what I had before." I stayed silent, letting her words come, letting her find her way through them. Her breath hitched slightly as she went on. "But the truth is, I don't want a second chance at love." Her voice broke just enough to reveal the vulnerability beneath. Then she steadied herself, gaze unwavering. "I want you." The word struck through me like a pulse, strong and undeniable. My chest tightened beneath her hand, and for a moment, I didn't trust myself to speak. I lifted my own hand, covering hers where it rested against me. Her skin was cool, her fingers trembling, but the connection was real, alive. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "I hear you." Her lips parted, as though she might argue, but no words came. Instead, her shoulders eased, a small release of tension she had been holding for far too long. We stood there in the quiet, the world beyond her apartment fading until only the two of us remained. Her confession didn't feel like an ending or a beginning, it felt like truth, raw and unpolished, finally allowed into the open. And in that moment, I knew, whatever came next, it wouldn't be about filling a void or replacing a memory. It would be about us, about choosing each other, here and now, despite the risks, despite the hesitation. Her forehead leaned gently toward mine, not quite touching, her breath mingling with mine. Neither of us moved further. We didn't need to. The words had already bridged the space between us, and the silence carried what our lips had not yet dared to say. The night after her confession felt different. It wasn't marked by fireworks or sudden passion, but by something steadier, like the first light of dawn, soft but certain. We didn't rush. There was no hurried embrace, no desperate attempt to fill the silence with promises. Instead, we lingered in that stillness, letting the weight of her words settle between us. I want you. The echo of it was enough to shift the air, to change the way we breathed in each other's presence. She pulled back slightly, her hand still resting on my chest, though steadier now. I don't know what this means yet, she admitted, her eyes searching mine. I'm afraid of moving too quickly. Afraid of what I might lose if I open myself fully again. I nodded, understanding. Then we won't rush. We'll take it slow. Step by step. Her shoulders eased, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw not just sadness in her eyes, but relief. Relief that she didn't have to carry the weight of decisions alone anymore. We sat together on her couch, the lamp casting a golden glow across the room. She tucked her legs beneath her, sitting close enough that our knees touched. It was such a simple point of contact, but it held more meaning than words could capture. At one point, she leaned into me, resting her cheek against my shoulder. The gesture was gentle, hesitant, yet when I wrapped an arm lightly around her, she didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a long, quiet breath, as though releasing something she had held for too long. I could feel the steadiness of her heartbeat against my side, slow and calming. My hand rested softly along her arm, not claiming, just there, letting her know she wasn't alone. You make it feel possible, she whispered after a long pause. To move forward without erasing what came before. Her words struck me, because that was exactly what I hoped to give her, not replacement, not erasure, but a space where both past and present could coexist. Where she could be fully herself, without apology. We stayed like that for a long while, not speaking much, just existing together in the quiet. The world outside was hushed, the scent of her jasmine plants drifting faintly through the open window, mingling with the cool night air. When I finally rose to leave, she walked me to the door. There was no grand goodbye, no passionate kiss to seal the night. Instead, she reached for my hand, her fingers threading gently through mine. The touch was tender, deliberate, a silent promise. "Good night," she said, her voice softer than ever. "Good night," I answered, giving her hand a light squeeze before letting go. As I stepped back into my apartment, I knew we hadn't just crossed into something new, we had chosen it. Not out of loneliness, not out of need, but out of quiet, steady desire. It wasn't the beginning of a second chance at love. It was the beginning of our story, fragile, patient, and real. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romances like this one. Share it with someone who believes love can be found in the quietest places, no matter the age or the past. And tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you the most.